It's the Battlehawks at the Renegades. St. Louis, the 3-point road favorite here, although they won't be traveling because they are in the hub. This is actually the first time all season that Anthony Beck's club will get to stay home in Dallas at HQ and play in Choctaw Stadium. Total for this one is at 46. Forecast looking like 90 and windy with a slight chance of a thunderstorm, but not anything you really have to worry about. If you remember all the way back to that first weekend in April, it was the Battlehawks not only setting the spring football single game attendance record, but they gave that crowd a show. It was a game-winning field goal from Andre Schmidt, walk-off 27-24. So when we look at this one, it's a little bit different of a situation because St. Louis was at full strength with A.J. McCarron back then. Now word from Anthony Beck is that A.J. is progressing nicely, and he will be reactivated, but as QB2. Now, presumably, that means that Manny Wilkins, who started last week in the win against DC, will get the go again here. Regardless, I think whether it's Wilkins or maybe McCarron feels better in warmups and gets the start, I don't think that's going to happen. There's really no reason to rush him back, but regardless, it's a pretty favorable matchup for either quarterback. Renegades are a bad pass defense, ranking 7th in the league. They're straight off a thrashing by the San Antonio pass game. I think the Brahmas racked up over 300 yards on them. They had a ton of yards in the first half. They just could not stop anybody. And I think a guy like Wayne Gallman, who really showed out last week against DC, making plays on the ground. He scored a touchdown. He had a big screen pass that he took 38 yards on that last drive that set St. Louis right up on the short porch. And he made a huge tackle on special teams on a fake punt that could have given DC some momentum. So I'm thinking of Anthony McFarland last week against Arlington and how he was able to be kind of a threat as a running back and do it all through the air and on the ground. I see the same with a guy like Gallman. I'm just not sure that the Renegades have the defense here, even if it is Manny Wilkins. I mean, the Battlehawks are dropping 28 a game this year as their average. So with Wilkins, they dropped 26 still, and that was a weird box score that they had against DC because they didn't have barely 100 passing yards. And if you looked at just A versus B, you might say, oh, well, Team B, which would have been DC, won that game in the box score. Well, it didn't matter because St. Louis was very efficient in the red zone, and Wilkins made enough plays to win them that game, and he also protected the ball, right? That was the biggest thing, no turnovers. So this Renegade defense is limping. They're down a couple defensive backs on the injury report. This is a short week for them. Remember, flipping around now, playing the first game of the week on Saturday. Last week they played the final game of the week on Sunday. So that's a real short week. And really every team has had major success running the ball against the Renegades defense. If you remember back in week 2 from the game we're showing you now, Mateo Durant, who's on the IR now, had the breakout game going over 100 yards against this defense. Like I said, Wayne Gallman might be that guy to step up and do that this week. They seem to be getting Wayne a lot more involved lately, and I'm not selling stock on Jacob Sailors yet, but I think this is a good spot for Gallman. I think Coach Beck was very pleased with his performance. But again, the keys to this offense are in the hands of Manny Wilkins, which is very interesting, not something that many people expected to happen down the stretch here. And, here we are. If you're a Battlehawks fan trying to lock up home field this week and you don't have your starting quarterback, and it's like, last year you had some stress at the end of the season trying to figure out, are we in, are we out? Now you're in the playoffs, but of course you want to have the whole thing at home. So you're wondering, can Manny Wilkins get us there? It's also worth keeping an eye on Ja'Cour Pearson and Marcel Aitman. Both of those guys who missed last week's game. Aitman actually has COVID. I saw that on the injury report, and, I think that explains why he was still active and dressed against Birmingham but couldn't play. He might have had a late positive test there. So Pearson as well dealing with an ankle. Both of those guys back and practicing in a limited fashion this week. So I do give a slight edge to the Battlehawks offense. And remember, the Renegades have struggled with mobile quarterbacks. That's the key here. You remember when Arlington played against Jordan Ta'amu? You could drive a Mack truck down the middle of the field. There was no spy. And even like a guy like Danny Etling, he had a huge run against them that basically sealed the game. So they just haven't been good. And Manny Wilkins had 80 yards rushing against DC. So look for him to do it with his legs. And I give the Battlehawks offense the edge. On the other side of the ball, when you look at the Renegades offensively, I just have a feeling you're going to see some changes from Bob Stoops and Chuck Long on this side. Again, we want to refresh your memory on something, a piece of information that we heard last week that could be critical. Renegades third-string quarterback Holton Ahlers, who has not been active yet this year, made a comment on his podcast last week that the coaches were giving some guys who haven't had reps the green light to play, and he even pointed to Week 10 in D.C. potentially being his opportunity. He even went as far to tell his college fan base back at East Carolina, show up to the D.C. game because I'm going to be playing. So that's some inside information that we got to use, and we got to expect Arlington to potentially shut down Luis Perez here. Again, some stats from him: over 1,800 yards passing, 12 touchdowns to 2 picks, and completing over 65% of his passes. So I don't know for sure. I would continue to monitor that situation. I'm not saying it's going to be Lindsey Scott or Ahlers. It sounds to me like it probably won't be Ahlers because they might be giving him Week 10. But maybe Lindsey Scott or a bigger role for Lindsey Scott than you would normally see with Luis Perez. Maybe some other guys who haven't seen too many snaps as well might be playing on the Renegades offense. You think about a receiver like Lawan Winningham or a Caleb Van Der Esch, who have been kind of buried on the depth chart, right? Do those guys see some action? For tight end, Seth Green backing up Sal Cannella all season. That'll be something to keep an eye on. And that's not a good recipe against a really good Battlehawks defense who is going to have their best players on the field because they have something to play for. I think the St. Louis defense will play a lot better than they did back in Week 2. Actually, back in Week 2, the Battlehawks surrendered the most passing yards they have all season to Luis Perez and the Arlington offense, even more than they gave up, believe it or not, against Martinez and Birmingham. So they have to play better this time around. A couple of injury notes for Donnie Abraham's defense here. Battlehawks actually had 2 concussions to starters on that side of the ball against DC. Austin Fiolu, who's been in and out of the lineup all year at nose tackle, and Lavert Hill, who is one of their shutdown corners. So keep an eye on that. I do think they have enough depth to overcome some of the injuries. I just, the line is 3. I could understand why with AJ being out and the sports books being super high on Arlington all season. But I don't think the odds makers have adjusted to the Renegades quite like we have. You cannot count on this team. This team is 2-6 against the spread. And if you watch Springball Boulevard, you know that because it's painful for us every week to talk about this team and betting on this team in a spot that might look good, and then they let you down. So they just don't cover as an underdog. Everybody overreacted to that blowout of Memphis, thinking here's the Renegades, they're back, and they only last week had 65 yards on the ground. So Davion Smith was a non-factor. He actually got stuffed on a 4th and inches. He's right back to his normal self with like 2.1 yards a carry. So you can't look at that Memphis film and think that this is a team that's all of a sudden going to shock the world. Do they have it in them? They do, if they play like they did against Memphis. But I don't know. The Battlehawks defense is dominating. They came up with 2 picks last week that really changed the game. They don't give up many passing touchdowns. And I expect Arlington to really struggle to get to 20 here. So St. Louis is the pick for me here, Zook. I lean them to cover, and I'm not sure if you feel the same way. I just can't lock it in without AJ because I don't think Manny Wilkins is a capable passer yet.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's dangerous with those legs. We talked about Sunday how fast he is. And we talked about Arlington being Swiss cheese defense.
Yeah.
St. Louis is clearly better on both sides of the ball, and I think they do cover. And I don't. I'll be careful with this. I don't think in that even with AJ the line would change that much. I mean, they're still winning straight up, right?
Yeah, I think if AJ was the starter, it'd probably be like a 5.5 or 6.